Hello everyone, welcome to the ITLS Academy. Today's lecture is on the topic nutrition support. Beginning with the nutrition in the non-healthy state, let's say it is generally accepted that a healthy, well-balanced diet should be based on a low-fat, high unrefined carbohydrate diet and include a minimum of 5 portions of fruit or vegetable per day. And some individuals who are unwell may require an intake that is higher or conversely restricted in certain nutrients. So, it is therefore inappropriate to promote a low fat or high carbohydrate diet or 5 portions of fruit or vegetable per day to some groups of people, which may include those who are suffering from poor intake or find some of the difficulties in having the foods or may suffer from loss of appetite or unintentional weight loss they are going through or also have some infectious diseases. So in those types of person, in those groups of population, we do not uh, insist to follow the healthy diet. So today we'll discuss how nutritional intake should be modified in situations of ill health. The next is your nutritional screening. This is routinely undertaken to identify individuals within a population who are at risk from under or overnutrition. So it differs from the nutritional assessment, which is undertaken by a nutrition trained or healthcare or professional, usually we can say the dietitian, and which gives a more detailed nutritional profile of an individual that should based on the procedures such as the screening procedure should be rapid, simple, acceptable to the patient, undertaken at first contact, should be carried out by nursing, medical and other staff, and it should provide an outcome that links to an action plan and also repeated at intervals. So many different nutritional screening tools are available now, and the tool of choice should be such that it should be appropriate for the patient population. They have the validity confirmed by peer reviewed publication. They have a suitable cutoff point to maximize the sensitivity and specificity. They also provide outcomes that can be acted on when appropriate. So the next is malnutrition universal screening tool. This is the type of screening tool that is the must is considered the most scientifically robust, practical, and versatile nutritional screening tool. It has been designed for use uh, in different care settings that will include your hospital, inpatient and outpatient care homes or GP surgeries and health centers and community. It also works with different groups of adult patients, such as your those who are of older age, the surgical patient, the medical and orthopedic patient, and those require the intensive care, and those who live in mental asylums. Also, it is designed for use by different healthcare professionals such as your nurse, doctors, students, healthcare assistant, dietitian, and lastly to detect means you can, by this screening tool you can able to detect the problem of undernutrition and overnutrition in the individuals in the particular individuals. So malnutrition universal screening tool is based have some scale that it decides whether the nutritional in the particular individual is of low, medium, or high quantity, or as per their guidelines. If the malnutrition universal screening tool shows the low position, then the low risk, then there is a requirement for routine clinical care, which means that repeated screening is required. That is, you have to go hospitals weekly or monthly, or if community level, then annually or special groups. For example, those who are greater than 75 years. If you lie somewhat in medium risk, then uh, there is a condition that you are kept in observatory conditions in which document dietary intake for 3 days is subjected in the hospital or care home, and if improved or adequate intake, little uh, little clinical concern, and if no improvement occur, then clinical concerns are followed. And if your position is at higher risk, then there is a requirement of treatment by which through which you can go to your dietitian, nutritional support team, or any implement local policy. Next is your undernutrition. So undernutrition arises as a consequence of an inadequate intake of energy and macronutrients. In some individuals, it may also be associated with the frank or subclinical micronutrient deficiencies. So it's a classification if we talk about. So there is no single universally accepted definition or classification of undernutrition is there. Although a pattern, we can say that if the body weight is less than optimum condition, or you have a loss of body weight, is the main feature for classifying that you are in you are in condition of undernutrition. For this, the body mass index plays a very important role. It is the cutoff value between 18.5 and 20 kg per meter square are most often used to identify the risk of undernutrition in adults. So the formula for this BMI, body mass index, is it is the ratio of weight is to height, and the use of BMI has its limitation. It cannot be used in children where height may be stunted as a result of poor nutrition, and in very older people or elderly where a true height may be difficult to measure, or where unusual body morphology invalidates the ratio of weight is to height. So, if we talk about its prevalence, the prevalence of undernutrition varies with the population and age group and presence and severity of the diseases, healthcare setting, and the method used to identify the undernutrition. So values cited frequently that includes 10% of individual with cancer or chronic diseases living in the community, up to 50% of the individual those who are living in care homes, and 40 to 70% of the patient admitted in the hospital. So these figures shows that undernutrition is not a rare event, and so healthcare staff working in all these settings should be aware of this, and the need of instigate and implement screening, prevention, and treatment policies. Along with this, there are some contributing causes of how the people come suffer from undernutrition problem. So, in most cases, the cause of undernutrition are multifactorial, but an awareness of some specific contributory factor is a valuable first step in prevention. So, the cause of undernutrition may be due to, firstly, if we take the first point as reduced nutritional intake. So what happened in reduced nutritional intake? The problem occurs in the patient only. The patient could not able to grasp the thing properly. It may be due to their inadequate food availability, such as it depends upon their communities or poor quality or unappetized food, or whether the patient nurse is isolation, or where meal tray cannot be reached, or slow motor coordination. These are the factors that affects as in inadequate food availability. Sometimes patient may suffer from anorexia, that is the loss of appetite, due to which it comes because of effects of diseases such as cancer, infection, inflammation. The person feel nausea and vomiting sometimes. That is why they could not able to eat the food properly, cannot take the nutrition properly. Another factor is psychological issues such as he or she may suffer from the depression and anxiety or loneliness and effect of treatment, for example chemotherapy. So these are the points which also make a factor that due to the inadequate intake of nutritional. Lastly, eating person may suffer from eating problems such as he or she have some poor dentition or may suffer in change in taste and smell, breathlessness and disorders in swallowing. That is that is why they face the problem of reduced nutritional intake. Now, second cause is reduced nutrition absorption. Okay, once the patient eat something, but there occurs a problem in absorbing the nutrients from the food within the body. So this is the main cause of reduction of nutrition absorption within a person body. This occurs due to the insufficient gastrointestinal secretion, including your bile and all the digestive enzymes. For example, the body lack pancreatic enzymes. There occurs a damage to absorptive gastrointestinal surface, sometimes gastrointestinal desiccations, fistula problem occurs due to which the absorption cannot done properly, and complications of drug therapy also is responsible for reduced absorption of nutrition in the body. Third cause is your increased requirements, means disease related hypermetabolism, for example liver cirrhosis or some cancer. It may result due to the infection and treatment related, for example post surgery and increased losses, and obviously with increased activity voluntary and involuntary, for example in Parkinson's disease. Next, let's see, once your body is comes under the undernutrition problem, then what are the consequences it shows? So the consequences, if we talk about the effect of undernutrition, vary from subclinical with no apparent clinical impairment to that, and are dependent on the type, length and degree of nutritional inadequacy and the age and the nutritional and health status of the individual. So first is your weight loss is the main consequence when a person suffers from the undernutrition problem. It also impaired with muscle functions, means functioning of muscle also get imbalanced because for example I'm taking your skeletal muscle. In the skeletal muscle the poor mobility comes due to the increased rise of falls. Respiratory organs also get damaged, and it results in high risk of chest infection and reduced exercise capacity, delayed ventilator weaning. Cardiac also cardiac muscles also get affected as bradycardia, hypotension, and decreased cardiac output. Next is your reduced immune function. So due to this undernutrition, your phagocytosis level decreases, your chemotaxis level decreases, and due to which there is a decrease in intracellular bacterial destruction. As this all occurs due to decrease in T lymphocyte, and once the T lymphocytes decreases, obviously the rate of infection in the body increases. So poor response to vaccination simultaneously occurs. Next is your impaired synthesis of new protein. So impaired synthesis of new protein indulge in poor wound healing. That is there occurs the higher risk of ulceration. There occurs delayed recovery from surgery, growth altering and cessation in children, and reduced fertility in women in men. Next is your Psychological impairment that deals with person may undergo through depression, anorexia, and decreased motivation. Their quality of life decreases, means go down, and also intellectual impairment if malnourished in infancy. There is increased economic cost. It is increased complications that increase length of stay in hospital and intensive care unit, increase readmission rates following the discharge, longer rehabilitation, increased pharmaceutical cost, and also increased visit to the GPs. These are the consequences once a person suffers from the undernutrition problem. So they have to face the consequences also, which affects both mentally and physically and socioeconomic health of a person. So what are the treatment given to the undernutrition? So if we're talking about the treatment, so nutritional support can increase energy and protein intake. It improves body weight, attenuate weight loss. It improves your functional outcome and also your clinical outcome in both hospital and community settings. For this, you have to follow the pathway of nutrition support for undernourished patient. In this regard, there are following points, that is the assessment, food access, supplementation using food, supplementation using proprietary oral nutrition supplements, and next step. In before starting any of the treatment of the patient, the first step is the assessment, means you have to know your patient deeply. What are their lifestyle, what are their routine they follow in their daily life, in which type of activity they indulge, what are the work down they do for a whole day. So this is the brief discussion that should be occurred between the dietitian and the patient before giving any of the nutrition diet to the particular patient for the treatment of undernutrition. So taking the first point as the assessment, on diagnosis of undernutrition, a full nutritional assessment should be undertaken by the dietitian to identifying contributing causes and provide a basis for the treatment. Then after assessment, the following steps can be taken, that is your food access, the supplementation using food. So let's come to the food access. After assessment, it may become apparent that some relatively simple non-technical measures are needed to help the undernourished individuals access the suitable food. For example, they can arranging the support through appropriate carriers, for example, shopping, cooking, company, wills, eating, locating respiring dentures, providing appropriate cutleries, dishes, and utensils, and modifying textures of the food provided. Next comes your supplementation using food. The modification and or supplementation of the food and drink using ordinary food items can substantially increasing energy and nutrients intake in many of the patient. Along with this, it is good if you ensure 3 to 4 meals each day, offering nutrition snacks between the meals, for example, a small sandwich or cheese and biscuits, yogurt between the two heavy meals, limiting drinks or food that providing little energy. You also have to limit the alcohol as an aperitif or added to milky drinks can stimulate the appetite and provide some extra energy. So success of this supplementation depends on the patient being able to consuming enough food, and a dedicated team of carers and health professionals should also be there. Their support should also be there for a proper successful nutritional plan to be given for the patient. Next is your supplementation using proprietary oral nutrition supplements. So ready to use oral nutrition supplements, that is often known as SIP feeds, are available that can contribute to a nutritionally well-balanced intake. These may used in the conjunction with the food fortification described and used to make up a defects. If an individual cannot eat sufficient food, some products are prescribable for patients who are undernourished. Last is your next step. If an undernourished patient is unable to achieve an adequate intake orally using these above suggestions, then is considered need additional support, that is feeding artificially via the gut through that is also known as enteral feeding or directly into the blood will be required. So what is enteral feeding? Let's understand. Enteral feeding, the administration of nutritional feed into the guts through a tube, including via nasogastric, nasojejunal, gastrostomy, or jejunostomy routes. Wherever possible, nutrition should be provided by enteral feeding. Means there is a pipe through which we provide the nutrition if a person is not able to feed through his mouth or orally. So enterals refers to the gastrointestinal tract. So theoretically, enteral feeding encompasses all nutrients assimilated via gut, including the eating and drinking. So it has some advantages also. Enteral feeding over the intravenous feeding. In enteral feeding, it is more physiological. Absorbed nutrients transported via portal circulation directly to the liver, and it promotes integrity of gastrointestinal tract mucosa. It reduces bacterial translocation, for example, bacteria migrating from guts lumen into the circulation. It stimulates gallbladder emptying, so reducing risk of gallstone, and also provide all dietary constituents, including some of the conditions essential. Most complications associated with enteral feeding, for example, due to enteral feeding, the person may suffer from diarrhea. Tube dislodgement can be overcome by managed by experienced administration and following correct clinical procedures. In order to undertake enteral feeding, the patient must have some gastrointestinal tract function. Absolute contradictions include that is the obstruction, prolonged ileus, and severe gastrointestinal tract bleeding. So let's discuss about what are the routes for enteral feeding. It is generally of four types. The first is nasogastric feeding. Okay, nasogastric feeding is the feeding through nose. Okay, why we feed via nose? There is an advantage is that nutrient can be delivered into the gut more easily through a tube passed via nose rather than the mouth, because the tube can be fixed more securely and is less likely to dislodge. So a nasal tube is less likely to disturb eating if the patient is able to eat, and so will help to facilitate transfer back onto the oral nutrition. So now nasogastric feeding is indicated when the patient is unable to take sufficient nutrition orally. For example, if he or she is suffering from severe anorexia, dysphagia, or mouth jaw injury. It also requires in that condition when the nutrition support is predicted to be required for more than 14 to 28 days or likely to require for more than 28 days, but gastrostomy contradicted. Here in this nasogastric feeding, generally the fine bore tubes are used. It is generally preferred. Wide bore tubes or Ryle tubes with increased complications, for example, nasoesophageal ulceration and decreased patient comfort. So external tube diameter is important for the patient comfort, and internal diameter influences the flow of feed but varies for a given French gauze. Tube should be passed via nose with the help of integral guide wire, and if possible ask the patient to sit rather than lying on the bed during the insertion. A correct placement should be confirmed by the expertise. Next is your nasojejunal feeding. In nasojejunal feeding, it enables the nutrition to be infused into the guts distally to the pyloric sphincter. So the advantage of nasojejunal feeding is that it reduces the risk of aspirating feed due to gastroparesis, and it facilitates early post-operative feeding. Along with this, it has some disadvantages also, that placement of tube is more difficult in nasojejunal feeding and tube may migrate into stomach sometimes. So next is your uh, gastrostomy feeding. A feeding of gastrostomy is an artificial route made between the stomach and outside the body. Although this can be made surgically if the patient is undergoing an upper abdominal operation, and is most commonly inserted endoscopically and radiologically. The the percutaneous endoscopic gastrostomy, that is the PEG, is indicated for the patient requiring enteral nutrition support, that is more than 14 to 28 days. Insertion is minimally invasive and increases the comfort than the NG tube. It has some advantages, that it decreases the inadvertent removal of the tube, so fewer disruptions to feeding is there. It decreases the reflux and aspiration of the feed, so overnight feeding may be safer and cosmetically more appealing, especially for the patient who are out and about. It discrete fixation devices are available that facilitates tube detachment, and it can be easily removed, and it is more practical for active patients, especially in children, and easily to remove when no longer needed, either endoscopically or by cutting it. Along with this, other type of gastrostomy is a percutaneous radiological gastrostomy, that is the PRG, which may be inserted under X-ray guidance and is more suitable for the patient with the compromised ventilation if endoscopy sedation is undesirable. Along Another type of gastrostomy is surgical gastrostomy, which may be placed if an endoscopy insertion is not possible and the patient is undergoing surgery for other reason. So complications include hemorrhage, skin excoriation from leaking gastric fluid, wound dehiscence, and intraperitoneal leakage of the gastric content. The fourth and last one is your jejunostomy feeding. This is a feeding of jejunostomy is an artificial route made between the jejunum and outside the body. Occasionally access will be made into the duodenum. So the indications are similar to those for gastrostomy, and that is nutritional support required for more than 14 to 28 days, but where post pyloric feeding is required. For example, gastric status contraindication are the same. Now, along with this enteral feeding, there occur some complications also. If we talk about the complications, then first one is the tube blockage that may occur in nasogastric or NJ or PEG in gastrostomy. For prevention of the tube blockage, flush tube with water every 6 hours and at the start and end of rest of the period. The tap water is suitable unless the patient is immunocompromised or fed post pyloric. For you can also prevent by medication must be in liquid form and not in crushed or tablet or open capsules. Flush tube with water before and after all the medications. And also you have to maintain the low pH that increases the protein precipitation. Flush tube with water after each aspiration. And for unblocking the tube, you have to do what, that never use the guide wire because it may pierce the tube and injure the patient. Ensure that the tube is unkinked and feel external part of the tube to identify any lumps. And if there occurs any lumps, then these may be dispersed by squeezing the tube gently. For this, use a 50 ml of syringe of cold water to apply push and pull pressure and progress onto warm water, again using push and pull technique for several times. Next problem arises is of aspiration. So aspiration increases with the rise of increase in age, increased debility and dementia. It occurs in 6 to 12% of neurological patients and up to 30% patient of tracheostomy. So feed may be aspirated into the respiratory tract without obvious evidence of vomiting. Signs include the dyspnea, cyanosis, and tachycardia, hypotension. It can lead to the pneumonia, which associated with increased morbidity and also with the mortality. Treat by stopping feed. Try to aspirate feed from lungs. Prescribe antibiotics if infection confirmed. Next problem arises is diarrhea. In diarrhea, the prevalence is uh, approximately of 2 to 95% of the patient receiving the enteral tube feeding depending on patient group and definition of the diarrhea. The characteristics of fecal output, for example, it is frequently and consistency are useful in identifying the potential abnormality. Numerous liquid stools will compromise absorption, cause patient discomfort, and present difficulties in care. Occasional semi-formed motions are less likely to, and therefore the feed should not automatically be blamed and stopped. Last one complication is your microbiological contamination. In microbiological contamination, as enteral feeding provides an ideal environment for bacteria to multiply, the consequences of contamination are potentially very serious. So for this, all equipments of enteral feeding should be used only once at a time, and if bags and giving sets are used, they should be replaced for every 24 hours and feeding tubes replaced according to the manufacturer's guideline. Also, the sterile feed should be hung in ward for less than 24 hours, and non-sterile feed, for example reconstituted powder, should be prepared with the strict attention of hygiene, covered and stored in refrigerator, and hung in ward less than 4 hours. Next is your parenteral nutrition. Parenteral nutrition is refers to the administration of nutrient via the intravenous route. It is required when a patient has intestinal failure to a degree that prevents the adequate absorption of nutrient via the gastrointestinal tract. Complications associated with the access route and the nutrition formulation frequently occur with PN, so careful patient selection and monitoring are essential. For this, first is the indication. Parenteral nutrition may be required in short term where the gastrointestinal tract is temporarily unavailable. It is generally recommended that the patient is fed parenterally for less than 5 days for the benefit of parenteral nutrition to outweigh the complications associated with this form of nutritional support. There is a route for provision of parenteral nutrition. Patients who require parenteral nutrition in the short term are fed continuously and use the regime of less than 12,000 small may be fed in via peripheral route. For example, ventiflone, venflone. The third one is the parenteral nutrition regime. Parenteral nutrition regimes is there to meet the patient nutritional requirement. Parenteral nutrition must contain the fluid, the nitrogen, the source of energy as a combination of carbohydrate and fat, and also with the electrolyte, some fat and water soluble vitamins and trace element. So our pharmacy production unit may provide compounded solution and standardized fixed feeding regimes. Vitamins and trace element should always be added to ensure that the feed is complete. And for monitoring the parental nutrition, parents receiving the enteral feeding must be monitored. Patient receiving enteral feeding must be monitored to detect the potential complications associated with the feeding and their clinical condition, and to evaluate the nutritional status in relation to the nutrition provided for the clinical conditions. Thank you for being with us. For more information, please log on to our website www.itlsacademy.com and register yourself. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, LinkedIn, and yes, do not forget to subscribe our channel ITLS Academy at YouTube. Thank you.